All right, welcome everyone and good afternoon again. We had a little bit of trouble with Teams as usual, but we are good to go. Welcome to our second CEA assessment webinar. We are absolutely blown away by the response. The number of registrations we've received from right across the sector shows just how much we all need this kind of space to talk about assessment and the challenges around the assessment and academic literacy in particular. For those who don't know, this is our second webinar in what we hope will be a regular series. It is really exciting to see Center for Educational Assessments at UCT and Center for Educational Assessment UP, University of Pretoria, working together on this. It is exactly the kind of collaborations that we need more of. Looking at who's joined us today, you can see the welcome, colorful picture there. It is universities, technicons, government departments. It is clear we're building something special here, and I hope we do. I hope we will continue to build the community of practice and the collaboration around the assessment. Assessment in higher education is tough right now. Everything is changing fast. None of us have all the answers on our own, but maybe together we can make the magic happen. Right, let's get started. We have 3 presentations for today, and they are on your screen in order from 1 to 3. The first one presented by Professor Chrissie Boughey on academic literacy and the problem of knowledge. The second one, the end of test, presented by Bill Cobb and Mary Kalantzis from University of Illinois. And the third presentation will be presented by Jody Joubert from University of Pretoria on 5 pillars for ethical and pedagogical assessment. Each presenter has 25 to 30 minutes, followed by 3 to 5 minutes key questions, which we will identify from the chat. Please do feel free to post during or after each talk. At the end of the presentations, time permitting, we will open the floor for real-time engagement, and you will have an opportunity to use the mic and ask your questions. All questions will be answered either during or after the event, and we will share the conversations with this group shortly after the event. I now will hand over to Saini Stein, who is the Academic Literacy Research Lead at the Center for Educational Assessments at UCT.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Given the prominence of discussions around academic literacy and its impact on higher education study, it's very important that those of us who are involved in the development and support of these skills, as well as the assessment of the skills we associate with the domain, to regularly return to the questions: what does it mean for us to be academically literate today? And how do shifts in the higher education landscape shape our understanding of that? Some of the key points that we'll be discussing today include academic literacies are socially situated, discipline-specific, multimodal, and identity-influencing practice, crucial for meaningful participation in higher education and beyond, especially in contexts marked by diverse backgrounds and the influences of AI. And academic literacies involve mastering vertical discourse, a systematized and abstract form of knowledge essential for deep engagement in academic and social practices, which remains a challenge for many due to historical and educational inequities. On the other hand, AI, particularly generative AI, is reshaping assessment and pedagogy, offering both challenges and transformative opportunities for learning and knowledge production. And a need for ethical and pedagogical frameworks for integrating AI in assessments that support reflection, metacognition, and equitable participation, rather than relying solely on automated, surveillance-driven methods, has also been identified. I'll hand over to my colleague, Hlamulo, now.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arsenet, for that. So now we'll start our presentation with Professor Chrissie. As you can see on our screen, we've got an emeritus professor from Rhodes University, which is also a professor extraordinaire at Stellenbosch University. Prof has been researching South Africa higher education through the lens of critical and social realism, with a focus on language literacy and knowledge in academic development. And today we are pleased to be having her on our present to be able to give us an insight of what her research and focus area has taught in the academic literacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me this afternoon. So I'm going to speak from the South African context. Higher education, South African higher education context. So the majority of our students are so-called first generation, largely because of the history of apartheid. Their parents, caregivers haven't been to university, as often first in family to ever go to an institution of higher education. The other thing is that they're most often speakers of English as an additional language. English, the language of instruction in the universities, may not even be a second language. It could be a third, fourth, fifth language. And what happens is that they're often judged to be underprepared for higher education and in need of some sort of support. And the national benchmark test, which the Centre for Education Assessment at the University of Cape Town, where I'm sitting this afternoon, they are located. They were intended to identify students who needed more help to succeed. One last point is South Africa is a very orate society. Again, because of our past apartheid, where education was denied to the majority of the population, or quality education, at least. I'm going to turn now to the so-called language problem. And I put on my slide language problem in inverted commas, because it's been problematized a great deal since the 1990s. So the common assumption is that the experiences that students have with using language, English as language of teaching and learning, is due to a lack of familiarity with the language itself. I certainly don't think that's the case. I think it's due to much more than their knowledge of the forms of the language, the spelling, the grammar, and the punctuation. But challenging element understandings of the so-called language problem as due to their lack of familiarity with the language itself is really, really difficult. So, reading and writing in the university, again, I'd say that, next slide, please. Oh, right, no, reading and writing in the university. Personally, in my work, I've always followed Brian Street, in understanding their experiences with reading and writing in relation to their lack of familiarity with a set of socially privileged literacies. So, like Street, I understand literacy to be a set of socially embedded practices, some of which are privileged in different spaces. So the university draws on a set of socially privileged literacies. Next slide. So if we now bring AI, artificial intelligence, into the scene, what it does is it offers students the possibility of producing the kind of text their lecturers privilege, their lecturers value, and want from students. And what's more, it offers them the possibility of producing that text very quickly and very easily, or seemingly easily. And of course, one of the problems with the lack of understanding, or the particular understandings that people have of students' language and literacy related experience, I would argue, is that lecturers are quick to take the red pen or the track changes and actually change the language. But you can change the language of a student's text and it still doesn't pass. It still doesn't, it's not acceptable as a form of academic text. There's much more involved. AI, to students at least, offers the possibility of producing the text that we value and which would avoid that red pen, that track changes. So if we move on to what I'd call the deeper problem of language, I'd say that what we see on the page or hear in students' writing and speech is related to their lack of familiarity with particular knowledge forms valued in the university. And I'm sorry, I've got a typo in that sentence. So I think what we see as the language problem is actually related to forms of knowledge itself, which are valued. So what are those forms of knowledge? Next slide, please. And I'm going to draw on the work of Basil Bernstein, British sociologist here, who makes a distinction between horizontal discourse, where discourse is a way of describing the world around us. So this distinction is between horizontal discourse and vertical discourse. Moving on to horizontal discourse, what that does is it draws on experience to make statements about the world around us. So, for example, in some parts of South Africa, you could say it always rains in summer. And that's true, for example, of the eastern seaboard of cities like Durban. It's not true for other parts of the country. It's not true, for example, in Cape Town, where we're sitting this afternoon. So horizontal discourse, because it draws on experience, it's contextualized and localized. It's not possible to make general statements usually on the basis of that. It's usually communicated orally using everyday language. So if you look at that statement earlier, it always rains in summer. There's no fancy language, ordinary everyday language. And it's associated with a range of different literacies. Not often with academic literacies, unless you're doing a particular kind of research, but it is associated with a range of different literacies. If we move on and contrast that with vertical discourse draws on abstractions to provide theorized, systematized accounts of the world. And an example which you probably all know is the rain cycle. So we all get the rain cycle taught to us in school, and you know the story. The sun shines on the ocean, the water in the ocean heats up, the water in the ocean evaporates, the water vapor rises and forms clouds. The clouds move in, are blown in by the wind over the land. As they reach the land, they cool. The water vapor then condenses, falls as rain. The rain runs into the river and returns to the ocean. Now that rain cycle, which we can't see happening, it's abstractions, it's theories, will explain rainfall potentially anywhere in the world, Amazon rainforest, steppes of Russia. It will also has the potential to explain rainfall now and into the future, given climate change. And it's powerful therefore, in the sense that it's able to make sense of phenomena regardless of time and space. Some people will also say it's powerful because it's largely produced in the global north. It's the knowledge of the powerful people in the global north. And that's particularly the case in South Africa, where we've had huge concern to decolonize knowledge in recent years. But what you have to remember is that vertical discourse is a form of knowledge. It's a mold of knowledge which can be populated by knowledge produced anywhere in the world. So much like a jelly mold, you can make red jelly, green jelly, orange jelly, lime jelly, strawberry jelly in it. It's the same. You can fill that mold, that knowledge form, with knowledge from anywhere in the world. There's a longer story here because you'd probably have to identify the principles underpinning practice, but it's possible to do that. So this vertical discourse, a knowledge form, very powerful because of its ability to make sense of phenomena anywhere, regardless of time and space. It's also the stuff of formal education. Some children are lucky enough to be introduced to it in their homes, but for many, the first time they encounter it is in school. And of course, it's usually communicated in writing, using specialized language. If you think of the Rhodes cycle, my example, then it will use language like precipitation, evaporation, condensation, and so on. So it's not only the vocabulary that's specialized, it's also the forms of language that are specialized. And it also privileges particular literacies. And I'll talk a bit about those literacies in a minute. So moving on, within vertical discourse, so you can see the little schema I have at the bottom of the page there. You've got knowledge, according to Bernstein, horizontal discourse, vertical discourse, and then within vertical discourse, two so-called knowledge structures, a hierarchical structure and a horizontal structure. So if we move on to a hierarchical structure, this is typical of the natural sciences, and what happens in the natural sciences is that researchers generate data and they use that data to make ever more overarching theories and principles to account for it. So schematically, it's often depicted as a pyramid, triangle on my page. So what happens is the data comes in somewhere at the bottom, towards somewhere on that, and what the researchers are doing are trying to make overarching theories to account for it. And ideally, you'd want overarching theories and principles right at the top, which a theory of everything, which of course is what Stephen Hawking, the physicist, was after. And when researchers work within a hierarchical structure, what they're trying to do is elaborate on or extend theory in some way, or to challenge it in some way. I don't think many students understand this at all, even though they might be working in laboratories, certainly at the undergraduate level. They're often just following recipes and so on. And I've certainly met postgraduate students in the sciences who don't always get this as well. If we move on to the next slide, a horizontal structure. And of course, here Bernstein isn't helping because he's using the same term in both discourse and structures. But anyway, what a horizontal knowledge structure does is it uses theory as a lens, much like my glasses. So you choose a theory, you look through the theoretical lens, and you're able to see things differently, or you see things you'd never seen before. And different theories can be used to look at the same problem or phenomenon, And the same theory can be used to look at different problems or different phenomena. And this is typical of the social sciences, of the arts, of the humanities. And what happens, I mean, if you think of a first-year sociology class, you've often got different lecturers coming into that class, and they themselves will draw on different theoretical lens to talk about, I don't know, the family or work or whatever, but they don't actually tell the students this. Students will often have a sense that Dr. A is speaking in a way that's different to Professor Y, but what's happening as they do that, why they're doing that, is not always made clear to the student. A lecturer won't come in and say, oh, I'm a Marxist or I'm a functionalist or whatever. So students don't actually know what's going on, and they don't often get the fact that their experiences are due to this particular knowledge form. Okay, now everyone, as I've already indicated, gets access to horizontal discourse. Some have more access to vertical discourse than others. If they come from an educated home, then they're more likely to be introduced to it at home before they go to school even. And then as they engage with school learning, their caregivers will support them as they engage with it. So advantage begets advantage, and those people are likely to come to university more prepared than others. In South African universities, I argue that students' learning and language-related experiences are linked to their need to master vertical discourse. But this isn't widely understood. But for students in this context, AI becomes very attractive. So it's not only that they're struggling with the so-called language problem, they're also struggling with this stuff that they don't get in class, this theoretical world which they're struggling to master. So you can see that AI is a very attractive proposition. Now, the question for me is about AI and whether AI is a different knowledge form. So if you think about AI can't understand anything in the human sense of the word. But what it does is it identifies and replicates patterns with remarkable sophistication. It's really very good at that. And when it's identifying and replicating patterns, those patterns aren't only words and ideas, but it's also the tone and the style. But it can still get things wrong. It can still get things very wrong, as many people point out. And if people are going to use AI, we need to look at what AI produces, and we really need to interrogate it. And my argument is that to interrogate it, we need not only to understand vertical discourse and the different knowledge structures, but we need to be able to interrogate AI on the basis of that understanding. AI also, I would argue, leads to the emergence of different literacies as users draw on it in different ways. So the literacies that we had before AI are now different to the ones we have. Now AI is introduced as a practice in those literacies. So we have to think about it in relation to knowledge and in relation to literacies, multiple literacies, because there are so many of them as well. So moving on, I've already sort of indicated this. For me, the big question is, are students sufficiently familiar with vertical discourse to be able to see when AI gets it wrong? My students are, not even my doctoral students are. And also related to this, are they missing out because it is a different knowledge form?
are they missing out on being able to use the powerful knowledge to make sense of the world around them, things that they see on an everyday basis? For example, prices rising in a supermarket. Are they able to use the powerful knowledge of, even elementary economic theory and concepts like inflation to be able to understand things like having to pay more for a loaf of bread? I've had a recent example of AI used where I think it did get it wrong. And that was when AI was used in a piece of research I'm involved in to do a discourse analysis of policy documents relating to doctoral education. So on the surface, AI, and it was used by colleagues, I don't know whether they were using Claude, ChatGPT or what, but what I would say it did was it produced a good thematic analysis of the policies. And I think the themes it identified, you could say, okay, yeah, they're discourses. But I don't think it understood the concept of discourse itself. The idea of discourse as a set of ideas which sort of clump together in language and which then bring worlds into being, literally language worlds into being. And one of the reasons for making me think this was the language of the text was wrong. So, for example, typically during a discourse analysis, you would use the word construct. So you would say this particular discourse constructs something in a particular way. So there were lots of instances, and some more subtle than that, which made me think, no, this is wrong. And it's because the machine is not understanding the concept itself. Another example is from students' use of AI. So a lot of the problems that people identify with AI is the quality of the references. And so anybody using it academically will have to judge the quality of the references that it produces. Now, all academic text is organized around a knowledge claim, which statements, which I define as statements authors or writers believe to be true, and evidence structure. So you get a knowledge claim, and a knowledge claim is supported by evidence. So you develop knowledge claims on the basis of your reading, your talking, and thinking, and so on. But the rule would be you need evidence. And references typically provide evidence for those knowledge claims. So references aren't, as many students are taught, their purpose isn't to avoid plagiarism. The references provide evidence for the knowledge claims. For experts, they can also indicate a position in a knowledge field or the use of a particular theory. I interviewed an ichthyologist, a fisheries science professor, and I was actually asking him about where the theory was in a particular journal article. And he pointed to the theory. It was actually in the section called Literature Review. And he was able to point out very quickly that this paragraph could be rewritten as a scientific equation. But he was also able to point out that he didn't only realize which theory the authors were drawing on. This was paragraph 3 of the journal article because of reading it, but because he knew the names. So he could say, oh, that this person in a reference, he's a such and such. So he was recognizing in the references the names that the theories that people were associated with. So the references are clues to reading and understanding, spotting theory, and being able to interrogate a text. And the use of the references is, of course, a feature of academic literacies, though I'd argue they're not often taught like this. And the references are related to the knowledge form, where we're looking for evidence and we're looking for theory, we're using theory, and so on. So there's two examples where my position is that you need to understand the knowledge form, to be familiar with the literacies, to be able to interrogate an AI-generated text. So what does this all mean? I think students will use AI. They will. AI can be very, very helpful. It's wonderful, really, really helpful. But AI-generated text needs to be interrogated. And without some mastery of vertical discourses, can students engage in this interrogation? I don't think so. So now the implications. I think teaching is often understood as disseminating knowledge. Ask the average academic teaching what it's about, and they'll say something about disseminating knowledge. And students often understand learning as getting knowledge. But one of the lines of thinking I've engaged in the past is that teaching at university is teaching not the knowledge, but about the knowledge, about the way it's made. And in fact, if you think about, and you need to read my work, I've cited it on the page there, to get the argument, because I don't have time. But a lot of our practices, even at undergraduate level, are actually teaching about the knowledge form and how it's made. Some more implications. Concerns about AI, and my colleague Sue McKenna has made this point repeatedly in talks she's been giving lately. Concerns about AI are often focused on detection and punishment, but that's not good enough. We need to do a lot more than that. Next slide. My argument is that teaching about AI, we need to actually teach about AI, and that needs to be incorporated into any activities aimed at developing literacies. Some argue literacies can't be taught. They can only be acquired through exposure. But we often have academic literacy courses, which, in my opinion, teach anything but academic literacy, but never mind. That if we are offering students activities aimed at developing their literacies, these activities need to draw on an understanding of literacies as related to knowledge forms. And that the need to guide students towards mastery of the knowledge form is to guide students towards mastery of the knowledge form and not simply the literacy. And then also related to this, of course, this is the topic today, academic teachers need to think about how literacy, how assessment incorporates AI as an element of literacy. Finally, where am I? We need more research. And I'm thinking Judith Reynolds, another colleague from Rhodes University, she did an analysis quite a long time ago now of the literacy of anthropology and the way texts in the field are particularly organized, interestingly, geographically and around time. I think that's the sort of research that we need. I'm sure there are some more implications, and I'm sure that the speakers who are following me will pick those up. But for now, I'm going to end, and the slides, which I think will be shared with you, have the references. So thank you very, very much for listening to me. And I'm sorry about the technical glitches, my technical incapacity.
Thank you very much, Chrissie. Do we have any questions, Shlamada or Sinet?
On the chat, I didn't see any questions. Also on the
Except we would need to unmute them so we can move on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just, do you want to present the other? Wait.
Okay, thank you so much, Chrissie, for the information of the presentation. And now we'll move to the next presenter. And just to remind the colleagues online to say you can pose your question on Q&A and as well as the chat, and we'll be able to pose those questions to the presenters at the end of the presentation. If you have a question now for Chrissie, please still do it. Towards the end, we'll get that opportunity again to have that question answered. Our next speakers is a joint speaker coming from the University of Illinois in the United States of America. And we've got Professor Mary Kalantzis, who is in the Department of Education, Policy, Organization, and Leadership at the university. And her leadership in the work of research is mostly on the leadership schooling in literacy studies. And she also specializes mostly on the multi-modality cultural diversity and the pedagogical application of digital technology. And the co-speaker is Professor Bill Cope, also in the Department of Education Policy Studies at the University of Illinois, with an affiliation across multiple university research centers. And his work focuses on the pedagogical potential of technology-mandated learning environments. And we're looking forward to the presentation. Welcome. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. This is Mary Kalantzis, and
I'm Bill Cope.
And we're here together. And thank you for inviting us to participate in this very important topic, because I think, as we all know, assessment, evaluation, the test is the tail that wags the dog. You know, it determines curriculum and syllabi. And given the enormous changes that have occurred in the possibilities that the digital offers us, we need to rethink assessment, not just as something that happens at the end of an experience, but assessment as you go. But I need to say we live in very difficult times, transitionary times, and part of that is with the introduction of artificial intelligence. And we have to remind ourselves that it didn't come out of the university. It was something that was created by 6 people in America, 2 in China, 1 in Paris, who scraped all the information and that humans had produced on the internet, and now is selling it back to us. And we in the academy are trying to figure out how to upload and use, or kind of invent apps to make it work for us. But it's important that we as academics intervene to tame and harness artificial intelligence for the purposes of our teaching and learning values, our traditional ones, and for an ethical use and an improved teaching and learning experience. And what we're going to share with you is what we've done in trying to invent the tools to meet those goals in this very difficult time where nobody's very sure about what is correct, and everything is changing as we're trying to address the potential and the dangers of artificial intelligence and the large learning models that they've produced.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a kind of an intro to this question of, and we're going to focus on assessment here. Elsewhere, we've focused on AI literacy, and we've done a lot of work in these areas. But in this particular talk, we're going to focus on the question of assessment. And it's a problem for education. Students would do their essay, they'd hand it in, you give it a grade, and you could trust it was theirs. And if there was plagiarism, there were plagiarism detectors which could tell what it was. So any form of assessment gets challenged by these kinds of environments where it's hard to know what's AI and what's not. A a UK academic by the name of Mike Sharples has called this environment democratizing cheating. So in the old days, if you were wealthy enough, you could pay your $100 to somebody somewhere in the world who'd write the essay for you. And what this has done now, it's given everybody the capacity to, it will do the work for you essentially. Now, this is, there are all sorts of apps around which purport to be able to detect AI. There are all sorts of little tricks about detecting AI. One trick is look out for M dashes, the long dashes, because they're typographers, not typists things, and M dash is a bit hard to find on a keyboard. So in other words, there's a whole lot of things where you can look for things, but you can never be certain. And the real problem is false positives. So, and also missing ones that are actually using the AI. But the minute even with the AI detectors, there are all these apps here. Quick search finds these things about humanizing the text and things which aim to obfuscate whether it's AI that's behind it or not. But what we say is, okay, there is a solution to this problem, and this is it. Now, the problem with this is on a number of levels. One is it reduces learning to long-term memory, right? Which is, individual long-term memory, even more narrowly. And what's the definition of long-term memory? Well, long-term memory is what you can remember up until the day of the test, and doesn't matter what happens afterwards particularly. In fact, in this day and age, when so much information is at our fingertips on our phones, we're constantly relying on these, social sources of knowledge. This is kind of an anachronistic idea that individual long-term memory is something which in itself is worth measuring. Any piece of work, intellectual work now, you're a doctor walking around the wards. Well, you've got a pad where you look stuff up and there's data available to you. You've got other people around you. So one of the problems with this is that most knowledge work these days involve access to knowledge constantly as part of the work. So this is a very anachronistic way to be measuring the outcomes of learning. Even more narrow than that, these people scribing with a pen. These days we've even got used to, this is a literacy issue, the idea that we can type stuff, rework, go backwards and forwards, refine what we do, refine our thinking, which is intrinsically hard to do with handwriting because it becomes an awful mess. Whereas with a regular keyboard, it becomes, you can do stuff which is iterative and careful, which is relying on the affordances of digital technology, if you like. So this is a problematic view of where we're going with testing.
Yes, a number of academics and schools are kind of reverting to this as a way of getting around what they think is the abuse and the misuse of AI in educational settings.
Now, another possibility, before I got into the other possibility, the cheating is kind of a, that's the least of our problems in our view, to be quite frank. The real problem, the deeper problem is now increasingly called cognitive offloading, which is, okay, if you've got AI that's doing the thinking for you, even if you type it out again, how do we deal with that problem? How do we know when the AI has pushed your thinking further, or how do we know when it's reduced your thinking because it's done the work for you that you were supposed to be doing?
It's one of the major issues that most educators are concerned about at the moment is, they call it critical thinking or deep thinking or collaborative thinking. And the fear is that that the habits will set in which make that something less a part of the learning experience.
Now, one other response is to move to select response testing. So we're going to talk about testing in general now. And one of our arguments here is the select response testing has always been limited in a whole lot of ways, but in fact, there's no reason to have assessment which is this limited anymore. And our kind of argument is, and we've just done a paper for UNESCO, which is going to be published in the next week or so, that in fact, generative AI puts a fundamental challenge to traditional psychometrics. And the center of traditional psychometrics was the select response test. There are these huge problems with select response assessments always. They're strange artifacts. They're not like knowledge itself. It's the trick of whether you can avoid the distractor item. And when you hit the distractor item, it's partly because the distractor item has an element of truth in it. So it might have been correct thinking, which led you to the right answer, or correct thinking led you to the wrong answer. I'm sorry. Correct thinking led you to the wrong answer, or incorrect thinking, you land on the right answer. And it's as if knowledge can be reduced to factoids and correct answers. You know, it's much more complicated than that.
But much worse is the fact that if you rely on a letter grade or a number grade, all it is a label at the end of a process.
So, yeah.
And what we will be arguing for is the capacity to assess as you go, to provide feedback as needed in order to improve learning, rather than individual students feeling that they're great or failures or just ordinary because that's what a letter grade or a numerical goal says of them.
Now, you know, our point that we're about to make is that this is an opportunity to move beyond this form of assessment.
Yes.
But the trouble is with generative AI, because we're scared about what people might be doing in an essay, we give them select response tests again, often heavily proctored. So, you know, that would be a step back. And when we have an opportunity to do something in assessment which is much better, much more effective, and much more, this is taking select item response theory's own criteria and turning them back on itself and saying, look, there are all sorts of inadequacies in this. The alternative, the other canonical assessment alternative was always supply response assessments. So let's say we're in the examination room and students are handwriting their tests. Let's say they're on the computer and the internet's been blocked and they can't talk to each other on the computer. So let's say we've got that scenario. But the problem always is that, you know, and certainly this supply response tests are ways of getting to deeper forms of knowledge, where you've got to reason something out, you've got to argue, you've got to give it evidence. You know, the classical form of those assessments was aimed at getting what we might call deeper learning, deeper knowledge than's possible with select response. However, you know, there's a real problem with, you know, sample sizes. It's a tiny part of the whole learning experience that you're dealing with right at the end. You've got an hour or two to do it. You know, they're labor intensive to assess, and marking's the bane of teachers' lives, and iterated reliability. There are real problems with these as well. And what we believe is that these new AI environments can possibly do something which keeps the objectives of deep learning, but is more efficient and more effective. We're going to show you that. So in order to do that, we're going to give you a walkthrough of this environment that we've built called Cyberscholar. So people might know Mary and I have been working in literacy and literacy assessment. So we're actually interested in here in written artifacts and how one assesses those. And we've been over a number of years trying to build technology environments which enact and demonstrate new ways of assessing these artifacts.
And multimodal artifacts as well.
Yeah, which we'll show you that now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen with PowerPoint, and I'm going to go over now to share a screen which has a web page, and this is taking you into this Cyberscholar environment live. This is on the web. It's a web app. So what I'm going to do into here is, this is the landing page. And I'm going to sort of not take you through, you know, the high level things. You've got things you're working on, you've got projects you're working on. A project is a sequence of activities, but I'm just going to take you into a student work. I'm going to take you into a work which was written by one of our students, right? So let me navigate around here quickly. I'll go back to, say, this version here. So what happens is, as Mary said, it's multimodal. And I want to give you an example of one of these artifacts of complex epistemic performance. This is one from one of our students. And what this student is working on is station rotation using generative AI and tailored learning in a middle school. So this is what this student's project was. By the way, we've also used this in high schools, writing essays on things. We've used this with medical students writing patient notes. We've used it with police trainees writing police reports. So on the left is any artifact which involves complex.
It's just a working space that allows for multimodal creation of any kind of artifact.
Right. So anyhow, I'm going to scroll down here now, and I'm going to show you sorry, I need to go back to an earlier version of this because this has been through. Sorry, well, I might have to. Okay, this version should, or maybe this version. By the way, I've got, excuse me, everybody, I have 1,000 versions of this because I've showed it to people so many times. So what you can see here is that the author has put in videos. What is generative AI, differentiated and adaptive learning? It's an elaborated, well thought through piece of work using station rotation generative AI, applications, and something here about Kanmigo, which is an AI application. I want to show this to you to give you the sense of the scale of it. Ethics and AI bias, they put videos in there, they've written a conclusion, and they've got a reference list down the end. So that gives you a sense of what one of these artifacts might be. If you like, it's a classical essay. Could be short, could be long, could be anything you.
So the question is, how do you assess it?
Right. The question is, no, we haven't got to the assessment version yet.
Yes.
So I'm going to get to assessment. So you've got to be patient with me. While the student works, and I'm going to go back now to the working version, which is, this is an editable version. So see here, there's a toolbar across here where you can do all sorts of stuff. But let's say what I want to do is, and assume it's early on. This is actually complete work, but it's early on. And I've just started to write and I want to think about things. So while I'm working, we have a piece of software called Cyber Helper, right? And I can choose anything on this page, which might be a whole paragraph that I want help with. It might be 5 paragraphs. It might be just one word, or the whole thing that I want help with. And there are all sorts of types of help I might need. So that's why I'm just at the beginning, right? And I just want help to understand. I'm thinking about station rotation as my subject. I've started writing about it. I need help about that. So what I do is I go up here to a tool which is called Cyber Helper. And I have a number of things I can do. I can brainstorm, I can research, I can plan, I can expand if I've got an idea which needs to be kind of fleshed out a bit more, summarize if I've written too much and I want to cut that, pull that back a bit. I can translate. One of the interesting things about these environments is it will operate interchangeably in any language, including small languages, which are technically called low resource languages. It works very effectively in low resource languages, actually. Check flow, advise, proofread, ask. So there are a number of things we can do, right? So I'm going to choose brainstorm. So see over here, what it's done is it's selected text and station rotation. And what I'm going to do is I am going to run that. And I'm going to explain configuration. I'm going to explain to you a little bit later, which is the kinds of AI we're using and how we're using it. But I'm just going to run it first so you can see the way it operates. So firstly, what it does, it knows me, right? It's got my profile, knows all the work I've done before in the system. So it becomes tuned to who I am as a learner and my capacities. I'll pull it over a bit so we can see what's happening. Actually, it's taking a second because I'll tell you why. In the configuration here, it's going to open AI ChatGPT 5, which I should have changed before this because 5 is slow because what it does a lot of reasoning, which means that it takes longer than normal. But so I will explain the configuration now after all, because this other thing is taking longer than I thought. So firstly, in this environment, you can choose any AI you want. Anthropic, OpenAI, GPT-5 is a week or two old. Grok 4 is a week or two old. That's the Elon Musk one. We've got a lot of OpenAI models. We've got Meta, which is Facebook. We've got Mistral, which is the French one. We've got DeepSeek, which is Chinese. Quen's Chinese. We actually have every publicly available AI in here. And the reason why we've got that is this is research. We're interested in the ways in which these run in different kinds of ways, but also you get different types. They have different types of voices in interesting kinds of ways. So I'm going to close that up. Normally, by the way, the teacher would select the configuration, or the teacher could allow the student to muck around with this and select the configuration. That's a setting. I'm going to close that up now. Oh, one more thing I'm going to say here. No, I'll leave the configuration discussion to a little bit later when we do the assessment. Okay, Dr. Cope, patronizing me. It's calling me by name and it thinks I'm whatever.
It's not doing that. It's been fine-tuned to be polite to you.
That's right. It has been too. That's true. So what we've got is we have behind Brainstorm, we've built a meta prompt which says, do not give the student the answer. Give them points which help them think to write their own work. Essential ideas, precise definition, role of generative AI. You can't just copy and paste this. It's just a series of bullet point suggestions. It's not an essay, right? But it gives you a lot of feedback about, in fact, and you can say, oh, look, it's being really, say the word and I'll tailor these. Yeah. So in other words, this is giving you feedback, right? So that's the first step. The first step is Cyber Helper with those 10 things that I showed you, which while you write, the AI is helping you. Right, what I'm going to do now is I am going to go out and let's say I've finished the work now, which I have, and this is the point of assessment. I'm going to go here now and I'm going to go new review and I'm going to do a cyber review. It could be a self-review. We also have peer reviews in here and instructor reviews, but it could be that. And I'm going to actually change this configuration because ChatGPT 5 is too slow. So I'm going to change it to another recent one, which I'm going to change it to 4.0, which means that we don't have to sit waiting for it for too long. Let me see. 01. I think 01. I'm going to go back and check again. OpenAI 01. Yes, I think that's one that's going to be a bit faster because it's complicated. The way GPT 5 is controversial. But the other thing I want to say to you is that we also have a thing, people might have heard about retrieval augmented generation. Don't worry about the technical side. We call this a knowledge base. So what you can do is you can put in resources which become part of the LLM, become part of the feedback. So let's say I'm teaching a cell biology course. I can put in 30 articles, 5 textbooks. I upload them all, and that then becomes the knowledge base. And it gets round, hallucinations. In this particular case, what we've done is we've put in everything that all our master's and doctoral students have written in the last 5 years, and everything Mary and I have written, and that's 35 million words, right? Now, it doesn't matter how big these things are, the bigger the better in some ways, but so we have a very specialized resource about technology use in education, and our students are pretty amazing. They've done amazing work over the last 5 years. That is, in fact, the resource.
Well, it's a bounded corpus, so we're not sending them out into the wild, into the AI out there. They are actually, the first access to the AI is through these selected materials that we've put into this curated corpus.
Right. So in other words, what Mary and I like to say here is this is not artificial intelligence, this is collective intelligence. Right. It's the collective intelligence that we put in the knowledge base. But there's another form of intelligence here as well, is that these things that we have listed here are we call rubric agents. Now, think of traditional assessment. These are the cells in a rubric, right? Except what we've done is, and I'll show you this in a moment, we've spelled out in a great deal of detail what each of these rubric agents is doing. So what it's doing, it's looking at this work, which is 3,000-4,000 words, or it's quite substantial. And what it's doing, it's looking at our 35 million word knowledge base, which is the expertise we've put in against each of these criteria. So you've got to think of each of these 10 things like an agent, which is a set of perspectives on that work. And what it's doing, it's going to give us a score on each of those, but a very, very detailed justification of each of those in terms of what how it got to that score.
Yes, but the rubric entails the pedagogical goals of a particular task that's required, and it's also the framework for evaluating whether those goals have been met.
Okay, so this is going to take a little while. It'll probably take 30 seconds or so. So we've got to get you to be patient.
I think the most important point we're making is that there's a big onus on the human teacher orchestrating and architecting the experience in the AI environment, and with the putting together the corpus, getting together the prompts in the rubric, and ensuring that it's what any classroom would want to be achieved in any particular content area.
But look, let me say this. Don't be bamboozled by this. It's this simple. Upload your resources, which is all your readings, let's put it that way, and create a rubric.
Right.
And bang, off you go. And what's operating is the resources you've put in and the rubric you've created.
Yes.
Right. So this might look, so this is not, we've kind of built this environment to make it accessible for any teacher to use and to be used. You know, you don't have to be an AI boffin, and you don't have to be a computer scientist. It's, you know, and there are tools in here. There's a rubric making tool and a knowledge base tool. That's basically, they're the only two tools. Upload the resources into a knowledge base and create a rubric. So now we've gone through, we're now up to the 8th of these things. Now you can create all these criteria, by the way. We created these criteria, and we're going to show you in a second when we get there what's behind each of those. But you know, one of the things we're kind of blown away by ourselves, to be quite frank, is it's just unbelievable that this is looking at this work 10 times from 10 perspectives using our 35 million word database. And then what it does, it goes back into the foundation LLM beyond that, but it actually prioritizes the resources that you've given. So this minimizes hallucination. It means you're getting stuff that's very well tailored to the subject that you're teaching. But the assessment point of view is about to be revealed, as we're up to the 10th of the 10 rubric agents. You can, by the way, create this with 3 rubric agents, 20 rubric agents. I mean, there's a rubric making tool that we've got in here where you can do that. We're nearly there. Now, you know, my point of comparison, by the way, is normally the student would hand in their essay, and a month later or at the end of the semester, they get it back and it's B+. Well, yeah, you've got to be patient. This is going to take 45 seconds or 60 seconds. So here we are, we've got the results. So there were 4 levels in the rubric. And this is quite a good piece of work. Applications 4 out of 4. The other ones are a little bit less. So this was a good piece of work anyhow. So it's given us an assessment. But the most important thing is there's a very detailed rationale behind each of these against each of the criteria. So in reviewing how this text addressed, so this is just the first criterion, previous experience. I see strong evidence the creator, where the text could be improved in this. So the most important thing is it gives you advice about how to improve it. So what we do is we keep a version of your previous work, and we can see the extent to which this feedback has, we as in the machine can see the extent to which. And look, here's a justification as to why we've given you a 3 out of 4 and not a 4 out of 4. And this is what you can do to get a 4 out of 4. One of the fun things is our students then keep running this till they get full marks. What a great outcome. It's called mastery learning. It's something that Benjamin Bloom hoped for
and the learners
a lifetime ago.
The learners are in control of their learning progress.
Right. But let me show you something about the rubric items. We've actually spelled out in great detail what we mean by these, because if you spell them out in great detail, you don't have to, by the way, you could put in something very sparse, but the more detail you spell out for each of the rubric items, the better the assessment result. So here, this is formative assessment because you can go and do it again. It's summative assessment because the last time you do it is the final result. What we can also do in here is we can talk to that. So let's say the text might explicitly address potential blind spots. For example, that's got an example. So I want to try and something down here to ask a question. Where your text strength and you could also do overall right, short explanations. This is a pile of feedback, by the way. And what I can say is, one thing I can say is, please summarize in 30 words. So because that's a pile of words, and I want to know, you know, I want a quick version of this first, and that'll give you a quick summary, which is less expansive. But the more interesting thing is, let me find something that it's talking about here. Constructivism. Here we go. Oh, I've never heard of constructivism before. What the hell are you talking about with constructivism? So let me go here. It's doing the summary for the moment. Give me a second while it does that.
We also do peer review and teacher review. They're all,
which we won't show you now. So you can also do peer review. And the reason for the peer review is to be able to moderate the, to make sure it's not just the machine. There you go. There it is, a quick summary. But look, please explain constructivism, because I've never heard of that before, and you've suggested I deal with it. Okay.
So the machine is a helper. It's not actually doing anything.
Right. And then you go back onto the left-hand side and you put a better explanation in that deals with constructivism, right? So in other words, it's giving you a lot of formative feedback, but also we've got these ratings, which means you constantly be able to adjust that and see where you are in terms of what your score is. This might be hard. Oh, there you go. The text you provided. Frames. Yeah. So it's speaking about constructivism. And then I can say, I'm not a first language speaker. Please explain in Chinese. Right. So this is a way of operating, people talking about translanguaging these days in a multilingual way. It doesn't matter what language you're operating in this environment, and you can swap backwards and forwards between all of them. So there it is. There it is in Chinese. So that gives you a quick sense of kind of the things that we've been working on. And I'll go back now to the slides for a quick summary. So let me stop sharing this, and I'm going to go back and share the PowerPoint, which was that the PowerPoint there? No, that's the PowerPoint there. Okay, share. Okay, so I'll pull it out here. So we've done our walkthrough. Okay, so this is in the paper, and I'm not going to talk about it in any great detail here. What we've tried to do is contrast CyberScholar with the use of public AIs. So public AIs are really problematic. They write answers for you. We've tuned this to give you suggestions rather than write the answer for you. But the biggest thing that we've done, I think, is we track everything that's going on here. And at the end, we can say, look, you know, you've used AI a lot. Fantastic. That's what you wanted to do. But we've got your keystrokes. We've got your timestamps. We know you've done a lot of work, and we can say, look, 80% of the effort is you, 20% is AI, or 50-50, or whatever it's meant to be. So in other words, there's accountability about the amount of AI you've used, the amount you've depended on it, and the kinds of dependency. It's quite different to get all your ideas than to just simply proofread. So we are keeping a record of all of that. So this is our kind of quick argument here about, and you can look, this is a video, you can pause the video to look at it, but also it's in the UNESCO paper. And there's a second thing about, you know, a second slide there where we try to, so we're arguing strongly against not strongly against, we're arguing for the intrinsic dangers of using publicly available AIs, given the way they've been calibrated, in contrast the way that we've calibrated them here. So look, this is our conclusion. You know, we think there's enormous potentials in this AI work. Frankly, we've been working in this area for a long time, and we're surprised by what has become possible in the last essentially 2.5 years. So it's really, you know, we've been working with generative AI for 2.5 years now, and, you know, we're just surprised by, you know, it's been incredible advancements very, very quickly. So we think deep learning is a possibility. It will magnify the effectiveness of teachers because, you know, you put in your rubric and you put in your knowledge base, and here you've got, you know, what we say is, look, the teacher is actually talking to 50 people at once in their voice because it's what they've put in which gives those results, not ChatGPT, right? And, you know, the biggest, most ambitious thing is the possibility of epistemic justice for all. You know, in schools where there are low resources and where not the teacher, you know, the student can't get access to the teacher as much as they need all the time. This is a way to magnify the voice of the teacher, if you like. And then finally, last slide, that QR code there will take you to our recent publications where you can see some of the research we've done. So I'll hand over to Mary to round off now, and we'll say thank you for being here.
Yes, the main thing I want to say, and what we've tried to demonstrate, is that we can't rely on what is commercially produced out there and what is produced outside of education and teachers and instructors. We have to become involved in inventing these tools, and that's what we've tried to do, to invent the tools that allow for peer-to-peer engagement, for teacher to craft the content and to scaffold the experience through the rubric. We also have an analytical tool which each student gets their own, and they can see their progress around the knowledge creation, around their level of engagement in this space, and the degree to which they help each other. It's really important now more than ever, when all issues are complicated, that learners are learning to be collaborative, learning to give good advice to each other, learning to advance together.
Just to explain that one feature I didn't show you here is you saw the AI review on the right. It can be a peer, anonymous or named, on the right, doing the reviews. And we actually want both. We want humans in the loop and humans moderating the AI. And so that's the
So our final word is that assessment as we know it, and the so-called golden standard, which comes at the end and is high stakes and can label learners for a lifetime sometimes in negative ways, doesn't have to continue that way. In fact, it's never been an effective way of ensuring that deep learning and progress is made. We need to assess as we go. We need tools that track. And when you're learning in a digital environment, you can track everything that a learner does and document it and give it back to them so that it's constructive feedback at the point at which it's required in order to improve what they're doing. And there's an onus on learners assisting each other so that they can collectively solve problems, learn whatever it is that is required of them, and can produce outstanding performance.
One last thing is that we are now moving into a beta testing phase with this. It's a web app. If anybody would like to be a tester, our kind of quid pro quo, what we ask for them is please write it up as research. Please think systematically about what the experience is for you and your students, and if you can write it up as research in whatever format, preferably formal research where we get kind of real data about this experience. This is a new world, and we would like that feedback, systematic evaluation, but also we know that people in different sites doing in different ways will have a different experience. So we're welcoming beta testers. If you want to be a beta tester, send me an email. It's Bill Cope, BILCOPE @illinois.edu.
Yes.
Send me an email and we can set you up.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce our third presenter, Jody Joubert, who is a lecturer in Computer Integrated Education at the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and manager of the Living Lab for Innovative Teaching. His research focuses on the purposeful integration of educational technologies, particularly generative AI, computers as mind tools, and innovative teaching strategies in the Global South.
Right, everyone. Hi, welcome to the webinar. I just want to start my presentation off by just quickly introducing you to the idea of what it is that I've been working on for a while. In terms of generative AI, we've now heard two quite good arguments in terms of AI. I think what Prof. Cope and them are trying to get to is a way in which AI should be used for assessment, and the previous speaker talking about forms of discourse and how we should interrogate AI. And this all comes back to the way in which AI can be used in a way that's ethical, so where we don't cheat, and a way that's pedagogical. So really a designed way of of using AI. So just a little bit of background. I'm from the Lit-Up Research Unit. This is just a picture of our collaboratorium. I'm the presenter, I'm the manager of the Lit-Up Research Unit. I'm also part of the UNESCO Uni-Twin group for AI in education. Got a slide on that a bit later on. This is not just me working on research in this field. We have a whole team of people who work towards seeing how technology can be used in teaching. This is Froggy, our mascot, and I think on that we can get going. Good. So the background, as we know, is that AI in education is now here. It's not new. It's been spoken about for about the last 30 years. The role of artificial intelligence, not just generative AI, but artificial intelligence in education. We've seen that there's new possibilities for learning at larger scale. My research here focuses specifically on distance teacher education, but I've tried to bring it into a more generic assessment focus for what I'm talking about today. But we see that there's these persistent challenges, things like limited infrastructure, uneven access, contextual complexity, and these we've also seen in the previous presentation. All right, Gen AI is being adopted. So like cell phone technology and internet technologies of the past, humans are quite good at grabbing at and adopting good technologies, especially those technologies that we find really helpful and very useful. Current literature mainly focuses on the opportunities and risks of AI, but the question now is, where do we move into to get into the space of using AI in a way that's ethical and pedagogically sound? The research problem, I think, is more or less clear. The most urgent need is that we need to find out how Gen AI can be integrated into our assessment ways or our assessment methods, not as a sideline, okay, but as a matter of good education at the end of the day. We draw from quite a bit of data here. This is journal articles that is based in generative AI in teacher training as well as distance education. So just to give you an idea of what's happening in terms of this, these are all articles ever written, all right, or accessible, ever written with regards to these three domains. If we put a generative AI or a global south lens over that, what did we call it now? Horizontal structure lens over it. We discover that there's a lot less in the global south. All right. So I'm going to start off by naming these pillars that we have discovered within the literature. And the first of that is purposeful integration. I think that is what the previous presenters really wanted to get to. Now, in terms of what we've seen in generative AI, especially with assessment, is that there's been these two schools of thought. The one school says it's prohibited. Using Gen AI is basically the same as cheating in an exam. And that should be punished, that should be monitored, that should be surveilled. But on the other side, we have this notion of compulsory use of generative AI, where you have to use generative AI in assessment, and yeah, that is basically the pedagogical lens. It is a bit more complicated, however. On the one side, you need to then start monitoring it when we get to the prohibition of generative AI use, and if you want to prohibit it, you have to monitor it. We've seen a lot of debate around this point, especially with our trusted tools like Turnitin and such, being unable to give us reliable data in terms of the use as we monitor this. On the other side is again a need for the educator to step in, or the higher education teacher to step in, and to guide the use of generative AI towards the more compulsory side. So keeping that in mind, we can then go and look at what this pillar is made up of. Okay, so if we look at purposeful integration, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is the intentionality. If we are going to use generative AI within our practice in general and within our assessment practices, we need to do it in such a manner that it's still aligned to our pedagogical goals and to our learning outcomes. There's no point in us trying to just say to our students, have at it, run, and do whatever you want to do if we cannot bring it back to our goals and our learning outcomes. Structured use is another thing that is advised, making sure that our systematic frameworks and our design structures and our formalized strategies align towards this intentional use and this purposeful integration. The next thing is pedagogical grounding.
Send them the PowerPoint and say you're exiting.
Good.
Just do that.
Great. So the pedagogical grounding is what we come back to then, is making sure that we are aligned to good educational principle and teaching and learning theory. As we go on, contextual sensitivity obviously being important, but we get then to a point that the previous presentation was talking about, and that's the cognitive offloading. Okay, so the task of redistribution. Jonathan and people like Jonathan, I can't remember the other names now, Drew and Pacterman, for example, talk about three uses of technology, any technology in education, which makes it a mind tool. And one of these mind tool characteristics is for the technology to offer a redistribution of cognition. In other words, we leave the routine tasks to the technology, whereas the humans can then focus on the other tasks. We leave the more horizontal discourse then, in other words, for the machine, so that humans can focus on the vertical stuff. All right. We avoid these extremes of compulsory use or prohibition. Okay. We go back and we look at higher order thinking, which we have been advocating for years. We make sure that our curriculums evolve in such a manner that we go beyond the rote learning that AI can do really well and really accurately. And we go towards more critical and interpretive capabilities of AI and humans so that we can dig into that higher order thinking space. Okay, we need to keep the people in mind, because I think at this stage we are working so hard at fighting the AI that we forget about the human on the other side. We should think about ways in which generative AI can support and enhance our human insight. Okay, so where we can move away from the mundane type of solutions, use generative AI to help us think of more radical solutions, for example, especially in higher education. Ideas that we, as students, might not think about, and that we can then explore further using that human insight. Okay, we see the need for reflective innovation here as well, getting to that point of higher order thinking, reflection, metacognition, so that we do not just go into a mindless trend-driven use of technology, but that we really focus on what it is that the Gen AI can help us with as humans so that our cognition can go to the next level. Obviously, we need to look at the institutional constraints. Many institutions have completely banned the use of generative AI. For example, we also need to keep in mind other requirements. So if we are, for example, going to say no more sit-down exams because they don't deliver the results that we want, but our professional bodies, for example, require these types of exams, then we need to navigate those constraints. We need to be balanced with those constraints and not just bring in AI just for the sake of it. And then, of course, the structural limits of higher education. We need to, again, look at what it is that higher education is at the moment, acknowledge the limitations that we have, and not go to AI to resolve these issues, or ban AI as a means not to show or exacerbate some of these issues. Good. In short, the answer is that using generative AI should be done with intention, not as an impulse. It should be planned, it should be structured, and it should be aligned with what we want students to learn and how we want students to learn. The next thing is pedagogical soundness. Now, this is now where the fact that we go and look for ethical and pedagogical ways to use AI comes back with the result of pedagogical soundness. It's almost a built-in bias into the analysis. The question is whether pedagogy can exist without assessment, and the previous presenter said that assessment is the tail that wags the dog at the end of the day. So the teaching being the dog and assessment wagging it. Our biggest fear and our biggest fight so far was the academic integrity. We have been working quite hard as higher education institutions to make sure that we have a fundamental integrity that surrounds our academic work, that our students present to us as lecturers and whatever goes out to the world. So it is really important that as we make sure that the use of generative AI is pedagogically sound, that we retain academic integrity. We see a codependence almost between purposeful integration and pedagogical soundness, where the one can almost not happen without the other. We need to consider our practical pedagogical strategies or our mechanisms that make sure that we have effective practices, and from those effective practices we then go and innovate. Right? We cannot build generative AI into flawed pedagogical strategy. So whether that's assessment or teaching strategy, if you have a flawed system and you throw generative AI in there, it's either going to make it much worse or even worse than that. All right. It will not resolve, like I said earlier, on these issues. Okay. The next thing is that we need to inform our innovation from success. Again, building on what works rather than trying to implement for some type of resolution to the flaws. We should integrate generative AI in a manner that's unrestrained. In other words, we should not block the use of it. We should allow our students to still have that imaginative and creative freedom, but at the same time, we need to uphold academic integrity. Great. Again, human-centeredness features here. I think I've said what I want to say in terms of that. And student-centeredness, our next thing. We need to keep in mind also the technicality of it, making sure that generative AI is technically able to do what it is that we want it to do, so that our pedagogy remains sound, and our teachers need to be competent. Teachers, I mean higher education teachers. And then, of course, acceptance is important. If you have a systemic reluctance towards AI, then again, it's these complete polar opposites. You will have a problem. If you just run at it blindly, that is also problematic in terms of acceptance. But we need to take these changes with an openness, but also a critical curiosity. In other words, making sure that generative AI supports good teaching, grounded in good strategies, ethics, and what works for our students and our teachers. The next thing is the ethical consideration, and this is something that a lot of talking is happening about, but not a lot of grit is given to it. We say that students should use AI ethically, and then very little tools are made available to do so, and very little understanding of what ethical use is presented. Okay, so the link that exists between the ethical use of generative AI and assessment is that academic integrity. So in other words, using it within what we are doing to deliver something that still has academic integrity. The compromise of academic integrity comes in when there's a dishonesty. So if you're using AI, it means that you shouldn't. In other words, if I can draw on an old-time example, if it is up to the student to remember specific facts, right? It would be cheating for them to have a little piece of paper with facts written on it. If the student should prove that they do the work themselves, it would be cheating for them to get someone else to do it. And that is exactly what happens when we get to generative AI. So if we expect a student to remember certain facts, they should be giving those facts to generative AI when working with it. For example, if the student should do this work completely on their own, then obviously generative AI is not the go-to. Okay, we should be careful of the erosion of deep learning and critical thinking. This is again where we get to that vertical discourse that we were talking about earlier on, making sure that there's a reduction in cognitive effort, right? But that we do not limit the students' engagement with material in such a way that it hinders their development of critical thinking. We need to be careful for embedded bias. So in other words, things that are built into the generative AI prior to use that might amplify certain lenses within the knowledge that is being created or being worked with. Some things like social, political, and economic biases that might be brought in. One that I can think of, for example, is an experiment that I was doing a while ago. I trained a GPT to assess assignments, and then I was quite naughty and I gave it one assignment that was just a direct translation to Afrikaans from another assignment. And what I did is I just said to the GPT, I do not understand this assignment at all. It must be bad if I don't understand it. So if we build in these biases, for example, you will then see that GPT marker will then start acting in a biased manner towards this language to say, it's exactly the same work that I've read before, but now because the language is wrong, or not the one that I've been trained on, I should mark that one down because it would not be understandable. One thing that is important is that when Gen AI is used, we should use transparent and accountable systems. We see a lot of talk around the use of Turnitin, for example, in this regard, because we cannot see that it's accountable and we cannot see that it's transparent. We do all kinds of tests and we get different results from it, which means that it's not predictable. We can't audit how these processes have happened because they are not visible to us. We can look at more of these ethical considerations, things like misalignment between institutional values and the use of generative AI, or the embedded qualities of these tools, the boundaries between humans and machines, the fact that it's so difficult sometimes, even if a student is using generative AI ethically, whether there is a distinction between work that's been done with the AI and work that's been done by the human. There is a need in that regard then that we delineate the roles. What's the role of the educator, the learning designer? What's the role of the machine? And particularly where this generative AI is used within the learning process and within the student's completion of assessment tasks. Then misinformation risks. The fact that we can work with AIs that have certain misinformation. The fact that if I ask an AI to write something within the South African context, I all of a sudden as myself, I say, write this as if it's me, but it must be in the South African context. All of a sudden I'm illiterate, I'm poor, might not have a house. Okay, so we need to look at the false and misleading information that might be built into some of these AIs and look at how that imposes on things like trust and learning quality and ethical educational communication. Right, so asking what's right, not just what's possible, is what we need to do. We need to protect fairness within our assessment. We need to protect honesty from the student and the assessor or the lecturer side. We need to look at things like privacy, human values within the use of generative AI. The next thing is meaningful learning. Now it's here where that discussion comes in. Is learning a means for assessment? Do we assess for learning? Do we do assessment of learning? Is assessment a way of learning, or do we learn without assessments? Okay, these questions are, I think, some of the bigger debates within the assessment space, and something that I've seen big academic fights about. But meaningful learning at the end of the day means that there should be deep engagement. So we should be able to assess that deep engagement. We should be able to see the active participation, so that interrogation of knowledge on a metacognitive level through exploration, inquiry, and meaning making on our student side. And that is what we need to assess, rather than fact or artifact. We need to look at student empowerment, and that's where the academic literacy comes in as well, to see our students work as autonomous agents that can direct and manage and co-design their own learning, who can be creators of knowledge rather than just receivers of it. We need to, again, keep in mind authentic context, not just the context that is built into our AI. We need to make sure that our learning and our assessment is socially situated, emotionally resonant, and contextually meaningful to the student that receives it. Again, higher order thinking, and collaborative learning are some ideas that resonate in both the pedagogical side as well as meaningful learning. Expanding on learning horizons, in other words, making sure that learning is not something that just happens in short term. We saw that picture of the learners with these headdresses on to make sure that they don't cheat. Our learning should not just be towards that test until the test is done. It should be life-wide and life-deep as well. Equity is something that I'll talk about as we progress, but making sure that fairness and equity and inclusivity are built into our assessment is quite important. And then creativity in learning remains really important. The encouragement of innovation beyond what is known is where assessment in an AI era can really shine. Good. Personalization is something that AI allows for us to do. In other words, if we have a learner with specific language levels, we saw earlier about the socially privileged language use, for example. So if we have students with certain language levels, we can now start personalizing towards them, getting information across in a different language, in a different level of language use, but this should be done rationally. All right, we cannot just say this AI should always talk like a 5-year-old, because at some point you need an empowered student who could go into the workforce and use the correct terminology within the field. Right, and then we also can think of the adaptive infrastructure where we can use AIs, for example, as tutors, where the generative AI can use its capacity as a what's the word that I want to use? Where Gen AI can use its capacity to adapt so that it can tailor that instruction towards the learner so that there's a more smooth and a more responsive way for the student to learn. All right, we need to rethink assessment, right? Traditional assessment needs to be challenged. We need to go more towards deeper, relevant, and imaginative approaches for assessment. This is, again, a debate that's been going on for years. It's not a new idea, but this is really now the time to step down and do it. And then we need to look at the pedagogical disruption that is happening. We need to recognize that generative AI is disruptive, and we need to go into rethinking these pedagogical norms so that we can remain meaningful within the learning space. In other words, Gen AI should be used to deepen our thinking, to focus on our creativity and our connection, okay, both between humans and between knowledge systems. It's not just about speed and convenience. Right, then we moved on to equitable learning, where we can ask, is the use of assessment, of Gen AI in assessment fair if it's not equitable? In other words, if we allow our students to use generative AI, how do we make sure that that's equitable? But also, if we go and say we do not want our students to use it, but we cannot measure it in such a way that it's reliable, then we are also moving into the space where that might not be equitable, right? If student A uses generative AI, but we can't detect it, student B follows the rules, does not use generative AI, so we can also not detect that, but A might be doing a better job than B. Are we doing equitable and fair assessment? We need to look at things like structural barriers, okay, the systemic constraints that we have, like infrastructure, connectivity issues, device access, digital literacy, etc. Okay.
particularly in marginalized regions. So if we are going to go to say, we are going to use ChatGPT, for example, how are we going about making sure that that is an equitable inclusion within it? We need to look at things like linguistic bias, whereas most of the large language models are trained in prevailing dominant global languages, which means that if we have more local vernacular language use or different linguistic contexts, then we are starting to move into a space where things become a bit more unequal. Right, so the solution here would be to have purposeful large language models, for example, for South Africa, that GPTs can be trained on, and in which students or users can then interact with these systems. Next thing is inclusive pedagogy. So we revert back to the pedagogy there, making sure that we offer the personalization, but make sure that that personalization is then inclusive, engaging, and still immersive to whoever it is that uses it, and making sure that our design is deliberate. Again, linking back to the purposeful integration. So if we want to make sure that it's equitable, the use of Gen AI is equitable, then designing generative AI use should be done in a way that includes everybody, especially those in under-resourced, diverse, or marginalized settings. Good. What does this all mean? This means that there are 5 pillars that keep up assessment. So, if we say assessment is a landscape somewhere, and in steps generative AI, some construct that humans have brought into it, then we need to make sure that while generative AI is within this ecosystem, we have the needed pillars to keep it standing and to make it work within our environment. The problem is that if one of these pillars goes away, that roof becomes a bit topply. Okay, or if we remove one in the middle, there might be a crack. It's important that we endeavor to have an assessment, an ecosystem of assessment, where we bring in purposeful integration. In other words, integrate it in such a way where we tell students exactly how it is that they should use it. We make sure that it's ethical. By that, making sure that the use of generative AI does not impact on academic integrity. We make sure that learning remains meaningful throughout. We make sure that that learning remains equitable as it's happening, and we remain pedagogically sound within all that we are doing within the process. In conclusion, the answer is that it is possible to use generative AI in assessment in a way that is ethically and pedagogically sound. It works best when we use generative AI as a mind tool. In other words, where we are able to interact with it, where we are able to distribute the cognition or to offload cognitively, all right, and where we are able to represent what it is that the student is learning outside themselves. So we offer the opportunity for students to show how they are constructing their knowledge. Again, this works better when we are looking at more higher order equitable learning. All right, and then we need to look at intentional designs that are informed by teacher choices rather than an unintentional use of generative AI that is done in a manner where students try and do their best. That is my story for the day. I am open to questions.
Thank you very much, Jody. Thank you, Chrissie, as well. So we will take questions, but before we take the questions from the floor, there is one in Q&A from Nelson Mandela University, from Daniel Brink for Chrissie. The question is, if we teach academic literacy, let's assume we do it right, which is in many cases not the case. How do we teach AI literacy in higher education, and what are the key learning outcomes for students? Above can be answered at the end of the session, so we are at the end of the session.
So I think you have to teach AI literacy in relation to academic literacy. I don't think you can do it separately. I think you have to do it together, and you have to do it in your, not in a separate course, but you're going to have to do it in the mainstream because it's so socially embedded. So that means ideally you're not going to do it in those courses, and that the people responsible for teaching mainstream courses, they take this on. So I think that's the big. It's difficult to do that, but I think that's the way it ideally should be done.
Thank you, Chrissie. Ruth, you have a question? Your hand is up, and I did allow you the mic, so you can unmute yourself.
My apologies, please. I wanted to just give Jody a clap. Thank you.
Thank you. Boitumelo, let me just... You can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful presentation. But I just want to ask about, the two things. Saying that we should teach students how to use generative AI, and I just want to connect that question to horizontal and vertical literacies, because I think my view is that the view is that AI is looking to democratize social privilege in terms of language. But if now we're going to say that the privilege still exists in terms of vertical literacies, I mean, I think what I find is that students often, when it comes to AI, I mean, I learn a lot from students when it comes to AI than I can teach them. So the idea of that hierarchy in terms of vertical knowledge are we then saying that AI is not able to democratize that as well, in that we think as educators we still hold the power in relation to the students?
I don't think it does democratize. It still holds people outside unless they understand, master the powerful knowledge. They're still outside. They don't have access to the forms of knowledge and ways of knowing of the university. All it's done is sort of given them a fake version. So I don't know. I think if people who say it's democratized because of the language, they're drawing on a view of language which I don't subscribe to. I think it's more than being able to produce a grammatically whatever correct text. So I don't hold that view at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Boitumelo. Thank you, Chrissie. Any other questions? There was a comment as well. Agree AI literacy to be integrated with academic literacy. To agree with the idealistic principles of the previous speaker, but the question remains how to.
Yeah, that's the 100,000, whatever, the $1 million question. I go back to what I said. I don't know whether you are a lecturer, an academic teacher of a subject. I think you've got to do it within your teaching of your subjects. So maybe to demonstrate the use of AI, to bring up a text and then to talk with your students about why it might not be quite right. If you're teaching at undergraduate level, I think one of the first things you can do is teach that claim evidence story, you know, and the idea that references are evidence. They're not to avoid plagiarism. They're evidence for the knowledge claims. And then to talk about the quality of the references, because I think a lot of the problems with AI do come up with references. I did once write a guide for students. It needs updating for AI, but if you email me, you'll find my email online. I'll send you what I wrote, but it does need updating for AI. But that is on one of my lists of things to do.
Mr. Jody.
Great. Sorry, I just want to get into that quickly. Something that we need to keep in mind is the fact that if we are going to judge artificial intelligence based on the fact that we want it to give us good references and we want it to give us good. Sorry, Brunk. Sorry, Mr. Brunk. Mr. Brunk, I think you are talking to us.
Sorry, guys.
I think we're good.
All right. I think that, yeah, I usually use the example of saying to someone, if you go up to a very experienced professor and you ask them, please, can you explain a certain concept? They will start explaining that concept to you quite well, especially if you have no idea what that concept means. You will very quickly be convinced of it. You can then go to the next phase and you can ask that same professor whether they can give you the references. Prof, please tell me, where did you learn this? Right. And then you might find that they cannot answer you. Okay, and that's because like our own intelligence, artificial intelligence cannot necessarily go back and index that piece of information. Where is it that this came from? So they might say, oh, you know what, I think it was, I don't know, Jonathan or someone who said this, right? I can quickly make up a reference that says it was Jonathan in something, I think it was somewhere in the 90s, let's say 96. The title might have been something like My Tools for Education. Cool, that's it. Right, so they can then come up with a reference. And the question then is, do we question the reference or do we judge the quality of the information? Because that is really what we need to go at. We need to go at what's the quality of information that we are dealing with within this knowledge exchange. What is the information that was given to the AI? So did the student, for example, go and find 6 articles and say, based on these articles, can you explain to me what this specific concept means? And then what is the quality of the information that was given to the AI? And that's then where academic literacy comes in, for a student to be able to go and find these evidence sources of evidence, give it to an AI, and then query that AI based on this. That is where the use of generative AI and the academic literacy, in my mind at least, comes together.
Don't you think, though, that the references, they do a lot more than that? I mean, students talk all sorts of nonsense about referencing, like you can't have the reference that's more than 3 years old. And I used one in my presentation that's 25 years old. So, you know, that's a judgment. Some references last and they'll have different shelf life in different disciplinary areas and things like that. But as I said in my presentation, the reference gives you a whole lot more than, you know, it tells you where the writer is positioned. It tells you the theory that the writer is drawing on, all sorts of things. And it's beyond just the reference. It's as you interrogate the reference, your expertise sort of spreads out to bring in all sorts of other stuff. So it's difficult, but I think that's the way experts use references.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Chrissie. We are almost out of time. 2 minutes. Is there something maybe in Q&A? No, nothing. Thank you very much for your patience and those of you who stayed so long. We appreciate you, appreciate your time, and thank you to our presenters.